Okay, greetings everybody. Welcome to Lunar Alchemy. This week we are looking at the shadow of psychosis and gene key 61. I'm John. With me as usual is Bella today. I'm really excited to be working through the energies of this particular transit because I don't know why, but it just feels really thick to me and is extraordinarily present. Maybe it's because of my completely open head center. I don't know. But if you've ever suspected that you're living in a world that doesn't quite fully line up with reality, this is the one for you to really focus on and contemplate how our perceptions can vary so widely across the world. So, welcome to all of our solar members who are here with us. If you've joined us on Facebook, thank you for tuning in. Bella, what the shadow of psychosis, this is a word that we use around the subjects of mental health, but as defined in the gene keys, it's blanketed over to all of human consciousness, at least on the collective level. And I know that throughout this past year, as we've been looking at each solar transit through each gate on the wheel, this particular gene key 61 has been one that we've talked about multiple times, whether it's because of a relationship with the transit or a planet is hanging out there doing its thing in the 61. We've talked about it a bunch of times, and I've been kind of like waiting for the moment when we're going to be talking about psychosis because it sounds so freaky. So I want to know what's on your mind looking at this particular shadow frequency, this gene key, and the potential that it has for us as we move through this transit. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I'm thinking about how we have brought it up so many times, and it feels like it is the title almost of 2020, 2021. And for those of us who know a little bit about the transits and are following the transits, we have had Pluto there. And in January 2020, we had what we call the great conjunction of Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter in the 61. And then Pluto is still there. And tomorrow it's actually changing to the 60. So this is because Pluto takes 248 years around the whole thing. It's finally moving forward, but I'm not sure that that's a good thing or not. The 60 is the last gate in the whole, when we look at the wheel, the way that we look at it in Lunar Alchemy and the way that Richard Rudd looks at it in the deconditioning process. We have the last gate is the 60. That's where Pluto is going into after the 61, and then we have the start code on 41 after the 60. So this is really like at the end. And also for those of you that have looked into the Pluto return, like where when the Proclamation of Freedom was done here in the US, that's where Pluto is going back to. And that's the first time, 248 years or 46 years. So now that's also something that's happening here in the 60, the very last one. So for me, speaking about archetypes, we have the mystic and we have the magician. That's the two archetypes that we have in the 61 and the 60. And I feel like the mystic and the magician are coming together. And in low frequency, when you have a mystic and a magician, you know, that soup of that together can be psychosis and can feel like limitations and like you don't have space. And a lot what we are seeing with this shadow, the 61, is this psychosis that comes from trying to have answers that aren't there, and where actually the 61 speaks much more about emptying out so that we can live the mystery that we already are, or the mystery that's already there, or actually the awareness of the higher principles and the attunement to that. And I think that that's not something that we generally learn. We learn when we're very young that asking the question why and having a logical answer to the question why is the way to go. So we are not even allowed to have like the mystery of the why, really. It what needs to come right after, as soon as possible, is a logical answer. And that for me is boxing us in, kind of keeping us in those structures that could be limitations like the 60s speaking about. So for me, a lot, I feel like we're breaking out of that. And I also feel, I was speaking to an astrologer, Alison McCabe, who is also doing things in the inner circle with us. And she was speaking about Gene Key 1, because the moon in the Pluto return for the United States, which is happening on the 18th or on the 20th or the 22nd, I don't know exactly the date, but it's around the 20th of February. And we're kind of seeing all these twos in that. Anyway, the moon is going to be in Gene Key 1. And what I feel with Gene Key 1, it is about a unique direction. It's about your unique expression of creativity and direction. And there is something, if the moon is there, and the moon has to do with what nurtures us and what we need, I kind of feel like what's going to nurture us through this return that's happening is to feel our unique creativity. And now I know, again, here it's kind of technical, but the first Gene Key, the 61st Gene Key, and the 60th Gene Key, they are all part of the middle pillar. They are part of the individual circuitry that is that pulse that is inside of us all the time. And when they are also in different places. We have the 60 in the root center, we have the 1 in the G center, we have the 61 in the head center. So it's really connecting all the different parts from the very bottom to the very top of this chakra pillar, of this unified chakra that I feel is becoming unified, so we can feel our direction in that spark of the first, and we can feel the inspiration of God and the great mystery and something beyond than just the logical why and the answer in the 61. And then it is a waking up to that individual pulse that is unique for all of us, and the mutation that's there to happen when we all tune into our inner truth, which is also connecting back to that 61. So I know this is a lot of things at the same time, and I should probably have slides and show everything, but I know that if you resonate with this, and if it sounds like something is tickling you, I know that this is, something that you can go deeper into and feel for yourself and find in yourself.
Yeah, I love what you're describing is painting this picture of, in terms of the possibility of what it means to be human in the face of what the reality of being human is experienced as. And when we're talking about the 61, what we're talking about is this mysterious pressure that exists coming through us. And you're talking about the question why, and it always makes me think about whenever that stage happens, when you were a little kid and you were 3 or 4 years old, and the only question that matters to you is why. And every parent or every person who cares for a child at this age knows the experience of, the kid's going to ask a question like, why is the sky blue? And whatever the question is, the answer that is provided by the adult or the caretaker or the parent, is that question is going to be met with another why. It's unable to be satisfied from its own framework. And that concept in itself, like psychosis, is this inability to perceive the true nature of reality from within our perceptive reality. So as long as we're using our mind to answer the question why, there's a difference or a lag or a dissonance between our perception of reality and the actual nature of reality. And once we can recognize this, that doesn't necessarily change it for us, but it can shift effective in our attitude about the pressure that exists within us and the need to answer that question. How do we go about answering that question? And I think what you're speaking about with the 60 and the 1 is really significant in terms of how to respond to this pressure. How can we live with this pressure as long as we remain in the state of evolution where humanity is dependent on the primacy of the mind in making choices and decisions? How do we do that? And I mean, it even says in the gene key for 61 that creativity is the best way to help free people from this psychosis. So I love that, looking at that, that central column going through the design chart, it links up in this sort of magical set of 3s that allows you to, the mystery kind of like culminates rising up through your body, and you can utilize that for your own creative purposes through the 1. And then the 61 is able to provide the awareness of divinity that exists throughout everything. I mean, it's really a beautiful picture. So how do you see this how do you see this shadow right now, either as individuals or as a collective? I mean, you mentioned 2020 and 2021 as having this sort of like theme of psychosis. Like, what are you seeing specifically in the world that is making it so clear? I mean, I agree with you. I feel like collectively people are waking up to the fact that we're all under this psychosis energy. But what do you see? What stands out to you that is making that clearer and clearer, or is impacting how we are making decisions, and what can we draw from that?
Yeah, I think what we have seen during all the months that we have met now is that the shadow frequency always has to do with fear. That's how we can discern what's the shadow. And when we look at the higher frequencies gifts in the city, they always have to do with expansion, and it kind of a felt expansion that comes from the heart, and that opens the mind and the heart and everything, and makes it almost impossible to judge. But the shadow frequency is always around fear. So that's where I would like to go with the mass psychosis. So whatever story, whatever agenda, whatever we are using that is creating fear in the collective is going to be connected to the shadow psychosis. And I feel that for the last years there has been so much of that that is pushed on us, where we are almost shamed if we don't choose fear. And I've never really seen that at such a collective level before, I have to say.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know if this is true for every country around the world, but I feel like here in the United States, this particular quality has gone through so many different layers and iterations of it, from the political unrest, the social movements that have been happening, for a while it was just like, oh no, all of the Antifa anarchists are going to destroy our country. And like, now you never hear about that. Why? Because everybody's scared of COVID. You know, it's like this sort of rolling, evolving fear that just kind of like, if you look at everything, and here we are trying to use our mind to wrap ourselves around this concept that can't really be answered. But if we're using our mind to rationally look at, okay, what in what circumstances does fear serve us? Because I think this is a relevant question with any of the shadow frequencies. Fear serves a purpose. It does serve us in a very particular way, and sometimes an extraordinarily necessary way. But when we're trying to look at that, if we're answering the question, how does fear serve us? This sort of, as Richard Rudd would say, an offshoot of the question of why. How does fear serve us in this context? When we look at all of the things that have happened from the political unrest around the country, to the pandemic, to natural disasters, and a variety of other things that have been going on. I mean, the US has been dealing with wildfires like crazy for the past few years. There's just so much happening all at once without many breaks. You know, I remember, like, it felt like in the 90s, maybe the 1990s, there would be this huge event that would happen that was really a big deal, like the Berlin Wall came down. And then there would be like years where nothing exciting happened, except, you know, like they caught O.J. Simpson and put the chase on TV going at 30 miles an hour or whatever it was. You know, like, these events were, the big events would happen, and then there would be these long lull periods in between. And now we just have this ever present, like, it's like the Leviathan has come onto the, out of the sea, this big hulking monster, and it's just sort of like rolling across the ground, and we're all like, you know, no matter how we relate to it, it's there in front of you, and you can't really move around without running into it. So, but as these different scenarios evolve and the fears kind of switch from focusing on one thing to the next, when we look at the past ones from our current station, it's kind of like, well, that was kind of silly to be afraid of. From a certain perspective, like, why were we making fear-based choices in this situation? Because I don't think those were really serving us that well. It just morphed into something different that now everybody else is afraid of. So, you know, like, with this like ever evolving mass of fear events, fear stoking events, things that we can connect with, to be afraid of, to be worried about. I don't know, like, what do you look for from what we can glean from the gene keys, or from even just, you mentioned the moon and where it's going to be in the 60, you know, like, is there something that we can get from the position of the sun and the moon that helps us, like, deal with this, get free of it in some way? And, you know, I don't know that there is an answer to this, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
I'm thinking to 2027 and what the global cycle is coming with, and it's individuality. And I think that this is a glimpse again of individuality. All those three gates we were just speaking about are gates of individuality. So it's going to be to find your individual truth. And I mean, when you're speaking, I'm thinking about the in France a few years ago when there was a shooting. I think it was like a concert. And I remember going to France right after. I remember my mom crying, saying, this is the first time in my, I don't know, 60, 70, I don't know, 60 something years that I'm going to lie to my own mother. And I didn't think that was going to come. But if you are going to Paris now, then I'm going to have to lie to your grandmother. And I checked in. I'm like, really, am I supposed to not go? Because I was going for work, and I was at that time I was still working in Paris, so I was going for work, and I checked in. I'm like, okay, is this like this crazy thing that I'm doing just because I have my Capricorn South Node and I need to go because of responsibilities and work? And then I was like, no. And I remember going to Paris, and I think it was, I don't know if it was a Friday after or two Fridays after, and I was walking on the street close to where it actually happened in the 11th like arrondissement neighborhood, and people were sitting on the terraces and like a normal Friday almost. And it was so amazing to see that they weren't choosing fear, because how big was the probability that there was going to be a shooting exactly in that place in Paris again? Like, it was tiny, right? But it would have been so easy to say, we're afraid of going out, and these terrorists that don't even, like, you know, in a way can also be illusionary. Like, we didn't even know what it was that had happened. You know, are we going to let that fear have us not live? And I think that part of reclaiming our ignition, you know, and not allowing the fear to have us stop living. And I'm not speaking here about living in a way that is, you know, we could argue that going to Paris when that had just happened was something that wasn't smart. We could, but I think, are you choosing the stories that are keeping you in fear, or are you choosing the stories that are allowing you to liberate yourself in a way that your parents and your grandparents haven't been able to do? And there I can see a difference in how I chose and how my mom maybe would have chosen. And then that for me is that the liberation that we are going into. And I want to just say here, I'm not speaking about individualism that is with elbows, and we spoke about that in the 54 about me. I'm not speaking about that. One of the biggest reasons for the fear and the low frequency of mass psychosis that is in our world right now has to do with the division of humanity, of this or that, right and wrong, where we are forgetting that we are one collective and that we are one. And the more we forget that, the more, this is the other thing of psychosis, the more confusing it gets. Because in the head center, we have three gates. We have psychosis, we have doubt, and we have confusion. So if we can sprinkle a little bit of confusion and a little bit of doubt, well, then the whole head center starts to spin, and then there is no way out. And that's the whole thing with the head center. It's a pressure center. So if we can put those three ingredients together, psychosis, doubt, and confusion, that is going to take up our whole life force. It's going to suck out everything that is in our body and just keep us stuck there. And actually, the not self theme for the head is thinking about things that don't matter. You know, and that's the thing. If I would have gone to Paris thinking about the tragedy that my mom had to lie to her own mom and this and this and this, like it would have gone on and on and on.
Yeah, so that story kind of leads me to this other aspect of psychosis that I wanted to bring into our discussion, which is how psychosis plays into our personal relationships and how our perception of another person, who that person is a huge part of our psychosis. The idea that we perceive behaviors, we perceive activities, we communicate with a person And we create this picture in our minds about who and what that person is to us. How do we relate with that person? And particularly, I think this comes up a great deal in romantic relationships, although it certainly happens in business relationships and even in platonic friendships. At some point, a person makes a choice or takes an action that doesn't fit within the psychotic framework of the person that we've built. And all of a sudden, it just blows up our picture, and it sends our own emotional systems, our attachment, energetic systems, all of the systems that we have functioning, that oftentimes people really aren't aware of them functioning, things like energetic attachments and these kind of connections that we naturally produce within relationship. It gets sent into like this wild, explosive, like, oh my gosh, everything is falling apart. And Belle, I'm curious if you have some insight about how psychosis, this gene key 61 aspect, this shadow aspect, impacts our relationships, and what, is this something that we just have to surrender to and know that it's going to happen to us every time? Or is there some way that we can actually get to know another person and actually know who they really are? Or are we always doomed to be beholden to our own projected image of who they are?
And what comes to me here is the city, which is funny because usually the gift is the pathway, but it is about living life without answers. At the end of the day, this gene key is about that. And if we can hold that true also in relationships, that is something powerful. And I can see that in relationship in my own life, that like I can be surprised like when I stop judging, thinking that I know how somebody's going to behave. When I can let go of that kind of like attachment, this is how this person is, they actually start to surprise me. And that's quite amazing. So, I mean, that's not a sophisticated answer, but I do feel like the judgment comes from the inability to live life without answers, because it's so much easier to put a label on that relationship, that person. But when we are opening up space for being surprised, that can happen. And I think for me, I have the 61 in my SQ, and it's also my North Node on the design side. It's both on the design side. And yeah, so for me, when it's on the design side, it's cellular. It has to do with the body, with the unconscious, with like the DNA and that kind of wisdom. And I can feel this process in my cells of emptying out. We were speaking about it. We had a call on Tuesday with our portals of deconditioning group, and Kat, who is part of like kind of hosting it, she was speaking about breathing. Like when you're really in samadhi or in a high state of being, it's like you're almost like you're not breathing anymore. I'm not exactly sure why I'm saying this, but it's like the in-breath and the out-breath kind of flows together like in waves. And it's kind of how it feels. Like when I lay in deep meditation, it doesn't really happen when I sit. When I lay down and I'm in deep meditation, I kind of feel this like wave thing inside of me. And I feel like there is an emptying out of whatever is in my cells, and that there is something else which I feel is the vibration or the harmony of earth, or like the human resonance. Like I just become part of the wave, that the ripple that I think is in the bottom of the sea, just right here outside, but I become one with that. So for me, there is a cellular, like the breath of the cells, or the breath of the sea, or the breath of my body. There is a there is a breath, an out breath and an in breath that has to do with emptying out, so that we are always in sync with truth. That's that's the inner truth that we're speaking about in the 61. And for me, that is something actually very physical. And that goes back to 54 last week, that ascension is something very physical. It's not something that is happening like outside or with your head center in some kind of visualization or meditation. It's something that happens in the breath, in the cell breath in your body. And it's biological, physical, and it's part of all the living organisms in this plane that we're in.
Yeah, beautiful. The idea of breath and its connection with inspiration, the gift frequency of the 61, from psychosis to inspiration. And the idea of inspiration is that you cannot turn it on and you cannot turn it off. It comes when it comes, it stays for as long as it stays. And it's very interesting, you know, when I was considering all of these things, I was thinking about, well, have I ever had an experience of inspiration? And I have to say, yes, indeed, that I did, and that it has, you know, one of the qualities that's mentioned in the gift frequency of this gene key is that it creates a permanent change of some kind, that when inspiration occurs, you are permanently altered from the way that you once were. And that was my direct experience. And then following that experience were these periods that completely lacked inspiration. And I felt pretty depressed about that, which is exactly what is described in that. Now, I was thinking about this because I was like, I got to thinking, Bill, I was like, oh, I know she has the 61. Well, I have the 24, the gate 24 in the ajna. So, you know, when we get together, that channel gets, you know, it gets completed. And I was thinking, well, okay, this is kind of interesting. Like, I'm trying to work out, okay, I have a totally open head center. So that means that if inspiration happened to occur within me, then, you know, it's not because it's defined and it's like a pathway for me that is going to be something that I'm like, it's like where I focus my energy. It's something that can just kind of like happen to me, you know, because I have this open center, and it'll just kind of like, if I sort of bump into it, it'll it'll kind of occur. And when we look at this occurrence of psychosis, moving from psychosis into a state of inspiration, or moving from inspiration into a state of sanctity, the city, we're looking at these like absolute transformations of not states, but of perceptions of reality. And those perceptions bring about a different state within us, but the state isn't the thing driving this. So this is one of those, I've been, over this year, I've been thinking about how some of the gene keys are like these happenings. They're these occurrences. And that seems particularly clear when you look at the cities, that they just kind of like, they pop up out of for seemingly no reason or something. You know, you just like, you've gone far enough, you've done enough things, and then all of a sudden it just like blows up. The explosion of creation happens. And when you're talking about the breath, there are samadhi states in yoga where the physical breath literally ceases for as long as the state is maintained. And what's happening is the energetic body is so fully activated and turned on that the prana that's carried within the breath is now simply being directly absorbed. It's no longer requiring the medium of the lungs to transform the energy source into something that our bodies can use. It's just like every single cell in our body turns into a direct receiver. So your body itself is breathing. But what you described, Bella, is like that state right before the edge, and like where you're feeling like you're not breathing. It's this wave thing is happening, and the breath is, you're not as aware of it. Even if you focus on it, it doesn't feel like it's quite happening the way that you're used to. That's one of those more edge states where we're talking about the edge of the difference in perception. And when we're talking about psychosis, moving into inspiration, the edge state, when we've gotten to that edge, it's this moment where we are so certain, so absolutely certain that the one way that we see something is the way. And yet somehow reality is showing up to provide a different possibility, to show that reality is in fact different than our true, this is where I get this one makes me laugh, because the 61 is about inner truth, and there's all these people out on the web guiding through human design or the gene keys, giving readings, and their whole post is about inner truth, and it all just feels like this like and this may not be, they may have the awareness. I don't know. I don't know where any of these people posting are. But to me, when I read it, it feels like this idea about inner truth is its own version of fanaticism. Like inner truth is going to set us free and all that kind of stuff. and when we look at the difference between in psychosis, this focus on the one truth, it's this full-on mentally derived perception and definition. When we get hit with a reality that breaks that apart, the only thing that happens is we gasp. And it like puts us right into our body. And if we have the awareness in that moment, that's that opening moment where inspiration can fully occur. Like we can be completely filled with that gift frequency when we have that moment of forceful integration with our body's awareness. That can be jumping into a cold lake. That could be in a sort of this isn't probably a way anybody would want to go looking for it, but if we're injured in some way and we're forced into our body's experience, this is why so often in the past, people who go through traumatic injuries may come out being transformed. It's because they've opened to the possibility of inspiration within them. So Excuse me. Well, I want us to be aware of our time for our members here to move into our transmission today. And by the way, for those of you watching on Facebook, every week in Lunar Alchemy, we offer a quantum energetic transmission to assist with the integration of the energies that are being illuminated through the transit of the sun and the moon. And what the moon does is it tends to amplify those lower vibratory frequencies. And I think, as Bella will have an opportunity to explore very soon here in an upcoming upgrade to the Lunar Alchemy process, a more physically direct experience of the energies that are being brought into our consciousness through these cosmic transits. So I never posted that link. Let me post that for you just to see. Bella, what do you have? I don't know, what do you take away from Psychosis? What do you take away from the possibility that exists for us as we're moving through this this period of a heightened awareness of the difference between the true nature of reality and what we are mentally constructing in order to control it? What do you see?
I would say make it a habit to breathe out more than you breathe in. That's going to be important, because when you're breathing out, you're letting go of some of these things that aren't yours. So I think in my life, I've been really good at breathing in and learning and taking in, and it's been part of who I thought I was, which was my psychosis. And as I'm starting to breathing out more and knowing that the inspiration is actually automatic when I am exhaling, what is not mine. So make it a habit to exhale more, and then the inspiration is going to come by itself.
That, because I know that I've had any number of times in my life where I felt like I couldn't take in a full breath. And then the realization dawns on me, it's because my lungs are still full of air. Dead air that's been hanging out just waiting to be exhaled. And this is interestingly in some of the I don't know if this is a tradition in India. This is a time period right now where people are focusing on clearing out the old from their lives, whether that's material things, mental things, relationship things. It's clear out the clutter time. And the way that all of the shadow frequencies function in our experience, it tends to close down our natural breathing apparatus into something of a locked in pattern that is not the full nature of our breath. So when we exhale, we often don't exhale fully. If there's air left in your lungs, you can still blow more out. So I love that you brought that up, Bella. If you want to know how to become inspired, well, become empty first. And that happens by exhaling everything that you've got. And then the inspiration, that in-breath, happens all by itself. So if we were to apply this to our mind, any idea that we have a judgment around, any story that we believe, all of those things can be dismantled and released. If the stories or the beliefs are really serving your life to be better, you can always make them again. You know, but inspiration only happens when there is enough space for the full nature to be expressed, to give that opportunity for the creativity to take over and express that inspiration to the world, because that's what it's here for. And in order to do that, we have to dismantle our mental programs. We have to dismantle our belief systems. And that starts with the stories that we tell, the stories that we identify with. So, awesome. We're having some near-death discussion going on with our solar members. If you're watching on Facebook, thank you for joining us for our discussion of the shadow of psychosis in the context of lunar alchemy. I did post the link down below in the comments. Go ahead and click on that to learn more, or to join us in membership to receive the quantum energetic transmissions to assist us with integrating all of this potent energy and taking the next step in human evolution. We will see you in a future discussion, and we'll continue with our members now.